Watch your tone. The words came sharp as a whip. The flight attendant's voice cutting right through the low, steady hum of the airplane. 10-year-old Kian Hart shrank into his seat, his hands still curled around the plastic menu. All he'd done was politely ask for apple juice, reading straight from the options listed. But suddenly it felt like the whole plane was closing in. The man towering above him didn't see a kid just following the rules. He saw a problem, and he was determined to show everyone on board who was in control. But what Clark Denham didn't see, not as he clenched his fists and glared down at Kian, was the silent observer in seat 1A. A federal judge, quiet but watching, every detail taken in. And what he'd really missed was who Kian's father was, a former military strategist who knew all about power, structure, and what happened when someone like Clark decided to make a scene. What the attendant thought would be a lesson in authority was about to spark a reckoning that would echo far beyond this single flight. The air in the cabin grew heavy. Clark's anger rolled off him in waves, his jaw clenching so tight you could see the muscles twitch. Kian, on his own, the unaccompanied minor tag glinting at his neck, just sat there confused. He'd done everything right, smiled at the gate agent, sat in his assigned seat, asked quietly for a drink. But as soon as Clark realized this quiet black kid was in the wrong section, he changed. The politeness didn't matter. To Clark, Kian just didn't belong. The moment that changed everything came quick. Kian pointed out the menu, still confused, still soft-spoken, and Clark's patience snapped. He leaned in, blocking the aisle, towering over Kian, and spat the words again, watch your tone. The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. The other passengers' chatter fading as eyes turned, unsure if this was something they should step into. Kian's voice shook a little as he tried to defend himself. But the next second, Clark's fist exploded across his face. The sound was sickening, knuckles on bone, Kian's head cracking against the armrest. For a split second, nobody moved. Then the cabin erupted, passengers scrambling, some shouting, a teenager fumbling for his phone, an old woman praying under her breath. Blood smeared Kian's cheek as he slumped at his seat, a quiet whimper escaping his lips. The man in 1A stood up, calm but full of intent, as chaos rippled through the priority cabin. Clark, still standing over Kian, didn't look scared, he looked satisfied. He muttered about disrespect, about kids who need to learn. But the atmosphere had shifted. The judge's presence cut through the noise, his voice calm and measured as he called for medical help. The rest of the crew finally reacted, and within minutes, paramedics rushed on board as the plane touched down. Kian was stretchered off, his jaw swollen, his shirt stained red, and not a word from him as they wheeled him through a gauntlet of cameras. By the time his father Marcus reached the hospital, the story was already circling the terminals and newsrooms. A kid, a punch, a flight attendant, a silent witness. Marcus stood over his son's bed, jaw set, the old habits of his years in military operations coming alive. This wasn't just a family wound. This was a pattern, and Marcus knew how to trace a pattern back to the source. While Clark tried to talk his way out in interviews, blaming instinct, saying Kian was aggressive, the truth was already leaking out. A passenger's phone had caught the whole thing on video. The judge had already submitted a statement. And as Marcus dug deeper, he found 6 previous complaints about Clark, each one buried by Skirich's HR department, each one dismissed as a misunderstanding or training issue. There were stories of threats, shoving, cruel words, but nobody ever followed up on now. The evidence mounted fast. Marcus, working with his old engineer friends, pulled deleted emails, altered reports, and internal memos, all showing that Clark Denham wasn't a lone bad apple, but a symptom of a broken system. Even the judge joined the fight, bringing his own weight to the investigation and, soon, to a national conversation about power, race, and the way children are treated in places that should be safe. As the trial date approached, Clark's defense doubled down. They brought in experts to argue reflexes, fear, misunderstood intent. But the video didn't lie. Neither did the witnesses, especially Felix Ray, now 19, who limped to the stand and showed the scar Clark had left on his leg when he was just 14 and flying alone. The courtroom listened in stunned silence as Felix recounted the same demeaning words, the same pattern of abuse. Marcus sat beside Kian, his hand steady on his son's, both of them watching a culture unravel in front of jury. Kian himself stood up in court, trembling but brave, answering 3 questions with quiet strength. No, I didn't touch him. No, I didn't threaten him. He said to me, "Let's see you talk now, right before he hit me." The words rang out, ending all doubt. The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. Clark was sentenced to 9 years without parole, his lawyer unable to spin the optics, the facts, or the stories of other children he'd hurt along the way. But for Marcus and Kian, it wasn't just about one man behind bars. It was about making sure no one else fell through the cracks. That verdict sent ripples all the way up to Congress. The judge, Judge Durham, was tapped to head a civilian oversight committee for airline safety. And Marcus was invited to help design new protocols for trauma-sensitive travel. Every payment, every stipend he was offered, he redirected to a new scholarship, the Kian Hart Initiative for Protected Passages. 6 months after that flight, Kian and Marcus stood together under the glass awning of Skyline Airport's brand new children's safe lounge, a place designed just for kids flying alone, filled with books, quiet corners, and gentle staff. Kian's name was on the door, and for the first time, he smiled at the memory of flying. Inside, Kian spoke quietly to a group of kids just like him. "I was hurt on a plane, but I'm not just a victim. I'm still flying. And I want you all to know, even when adults get it wrong, there are others who will fight to make it right." The applause was gentle, honest, and as Kian stepped down, Marcus met his eyes, proud and certain. Later, as they walked through the terminal, Kian tugged his dad's sleeve and asked softly, "Do you think he's sorry?" Marcus thought for a long moment, then shook his head. "Maybe, but that's not our burden anymore." That night, Kian drifted off to sleep. No nightmares, just dreams of open skies. He thought no one with power was watching until justice stood up from row 4. If you stand for dignity, protection, and consequence, subscribe and join us. Because together, we rise. Disclaimer: this story is a work of fiction, created to spark discussion about justice, accountability, and the need for safe, respectful environments for every child.